pass on to the next talk. Simona, Anastasio. Hello, Simona.
Yes, I'm here.
Hello there. Okay, so would you like to share your screen with us to start with?
Can you see?
It's just coming up in a minute. Yes, that's coming. That's fine. And right, so I'll just give you an introduction. I'll just let you know that I'll give you a warning 5 minutes before the end. Okay, so our next presenter is Simona Anastasio, and the name of her talk is French and Italian L2 Learners Motion Events Construal, from acquisitional perspectives to pedagogical implications. Thank you very much.
Okay, good morning to everyone. Good afternoon to everyone. So this is my discussion plan today. I'm going to introduce my research issues, the theoretical background and research goals, the methodology I used, and some results and some pedagogical implications of my results. So this research focuses on the expression of motion events in French and Italian L2 by adult learners. So the first goal is to test the impact of L1 typological properties in L2 oral narratives. So as proved in literature, and as you know very well, there is typological variations in languages according to the locus of information of spatial components, namely manner and path. As you can see in the two examples in English and French, he swam across the river, and in French, il traversa le fleuve à la nage. So the main goal of this study is to test if there is any possibility to restructure the L1 spatial conceptualization according to the L2 properties during second language acquisition by adults. That's why we adopt the thinking for speaking hypothesis by Slovin that suggests that it is very, very difficult to restructure a conceptualization of the information you want to verbalize during second language acquisition. The last but not least, I will try also to ponder over some pedagogical implication of L2 motion events results, but I want to stress that for the moment, it is just some hints, and there is no, just some hints, and there is no applications of these reflections in classroom. So as for the theoretical background, so you know very, very well the typological classification proposed by Talmian based on locus of informational path. So here you have some examples in English and in Spanish. So English as a Germanic language is considered as a satellite framed language because English native speakers tend to code move and manner in or cause in main verb, and path outside main verb in particles. On the contrary, Spanish as a Roman language is considered as a verb-framed language because native speakers of Spanish tend to lexicalize path and movement in motion in the main verb and manner outside verb. So in 2004 and 2006, Slovin proposes a decline of languages based on motion, on manner motion saliency, going from high manner salient languages to low manner salient languages. So speakers of satellite languages, according to the author, are trained to make finer manner distinction when talking about motion events than speakers of verb-framed languages. And in addition, they seem to include manner information more often than speakers of verb-framed languages. This is also due to the fact that in satellite languages contain a larger lexicon of manner of motion events. But the author points out that typological characterization often reflect tendencies rather than absolute differences between languages. So, apart from inter-typological variation, it is also possible to find intra-typological variation within languages considering as belonging to the same group. This is the case, for instance, of Italian and French, because they are considered as verb-framed languages, but Italian is more satellite than French because of the existence of some satellite constructions that we call syntagmatic verbs, such as saltare via, which correspond to jump away or jump out in English. And in French, on the contrary, to express this type of information, jump out, saltare via, native speakers tend to use the verb escape, s'échapper. So what about the results of motion events nowadays in literature? So studies about motion show different results depending on languages in contact, so the L1, L2, or L1, L2, L3. The type of motion investigated, voluntary or caused motion, the task used, the L2 proficiency level, and certainly the input. So there are 3 research goals that guide this study. First of all, how to code motion events in an oral narrative task by university learners of French and Italian L2 who differ for the L1, English, French, or Italian, their proficiency level, intermediate or advanced, and this proficiency level has been established according to the morphosyntactic complexity of the oral narratives. The second goal is to explore the impact of cross-linguistic influence according to the proficiency level and the L1, L2 typological properties. The third research goal is to explore some pedagogical strategies to teach motion in L2, namely to help learners to grasp some satellite construction when such escape from their attention in classroom. So as for methodology, we firstly analyzed some productions in L1, so produced by the native speakers of Italian, English, and French. And for this type of study, we formulate two research questions. So we try, first of all, to test if the real usages of these 3 languages confirm the typological classification proposed by Talmy. So the hypothesis is that yes, because English native speakers should tend to use satellite structures, and French and Italian, on the contrary, they should tend to prefer verb patterns. The second research question is, can we find intratypological variation in our data between French and Italian native speakers? The hypothesis is that normally we have to find this type of intratypological variation because of the existence of syntagmatic verbs in Italian, which are absent in French, even if in French it is possible to create some satellite constructions. So as for motion events in L2, so we analyzed the expression of motion events by English and Italian native speaker of French and by English and French learners of Italian L2. So you can see that for every target language, we have learners whose L1 is either typological close or typological distant from the target language. So for the motion events in L2, there are 3 research questions. Is there an impact of the L1 on the L2? That is the thinking for speaking hypothesis. Can we find an evolution according to the L2 proficiency level? And can the typological proximity or distance play an important role during second language acquisition? So our hypothesis, based on what literature offers today, that is, beginners normally tend to adopt neutral principles in accomplishing a task, so they tend to minimally respond to the task. On the contrary, at the intermediate and advanced learner, there is a stronger impact of the L1 because learners dispose several linguistic devices to transfer L1 spatial conceptualization into the L2. And the third hypothesis deals with cross-linguistic influence. So we hypothesize that cross-linguistic influence may also depend on the learner's perceptual language proximity and distance between the languages in contact, that is the psychotypology. So a total of 110 participants, informants participated in the study. So 30 native speakers, temple language, 40 learners of French L2 and 40 learners of Italian L2. So each group of learners has been subdivided into two groups, that is intermediate and advanced learners. The L1 speakers are instructed oral speakers registered in their native country, Ireland, France, and Italy. And the L2, so the learners are university learners in their own country at university. So at the University College Cork in Ireland, at University of Avignon in France, and University of Naples in Italy. All the participants had to accomplish a complex verbal task. So they had to produce an oral narrative suitable for the analysis of spatial information from the moment of the conceptualization of the communicative intention to its verbalization. So the hypothesized question for this type of task is what happened to the protagonist in time X. And all the narrative data have been collected by means of the frog story. I guess you know very well. The frog story is made of 24 wordless pictures and is rich in translational situations. So as for the analysis of our data, the analysis is qualitative and quantitative, and I need to make many comparisons between groups. That is, I had to compare the L1 groups with the L2 groups, or L2 groups according to their proficiency level, or the groups of learners whose L1 was different, but they who had the same L2. So productions were analyzed from different perspectives. First of all, I had to identify the spatial information expressed, that is path, manner, or cause. Secondly, the information locus, so it is the distribution of these three types of spatial components between the verb root. And so it was important to identify the type of motion verb and the other linguistic devices, that is articles, prepositional phrases, and adverbs. The third analysis deals with the utterance density, semantic density, that is the number of spatial components expressed within the same clause. So as for the results in L1 confirm the intertypological variation proposed by Talmy and the revision proposed by Slovin. That is, our English native speakers tend to adopt satellite frame patterns, so they paid great attention to manner systematically expressed in the verb. So verbs such as tiptoe, spike, tumble, pop, sneak. On the contrary, French and Italian native speakers tend to adopt verb framed patterns, so path in manner, such as sortir, cadere, uscire. But contrary to our expectations, when manner is expressed, is very, very seldom coded outside the verb. That is, French and Italian native speakers prefer to use manner motion verb to express manner instead of coding manner outside the verb. There is no difference in our data in the amount of motion verb used. The difference lies in the types of motion verb used, that is, the manner motion verbs are exploited especially by English native speakers.
ماما رولا ايش في جسون؟ لا العبوا سوا في ذا.
Okay. So as for semantic density, as expected, L1 utterances are slightly denser in English than French and Italian. That is, English native speakers tend to package more than one spatial information within the same clause. So they tend to express 2 or 3 semantic components within the same clause. On the contrary, French and Italian native speakers prefer to express just one spatial information or at least 2 components within the same clause.
And Simona, you have 5 minutes left, just to let you know.
So as for the intra-typological variation between French and Italian, our data show that Italian is more satellite framed than French. So we can consider Italian as a hybrid framed language or path salient languages because of the coexistence of verb as satellite structure. So you can see in the graphic that particles have been exploited by English native speakers, but also by Italian and never by French native speakers. So as for the results in L2, our analysis shows some common tendencies related to the developmental trajectory of learners. That is, advanced learners are more target-like than the intermediate ones as expected. So there is an increase of longer narratives, number of motion events and motion verbs, and a decrease of long words borrowing idiosyncratic forms. Another important aspect is that intermediate learners pay great attention to path information. That is the most basic salient information for this type of task. But it is also important to say that advanced learners develop more linguistic means to express more than one spatial information within the same clause, for instance, by means of complex motion verbs, which lexicalize more than one spatial information at the same time. For example, in French, arrampicarsi, we have the manner and path information, in Italian, sorry. And arrampicarsi corresponds to climb out, climb down in English. So we can say that there is no L1 thinking for speaking L2 in our intermediate data because learners tend to respond minimally to the task with only the minimal amount of linguistic means at their disposal. Utterance density is another sign of the developmental trajectory in L2 because intermediate learners tend to express just one spatial information or two components at least. On the contrary, the utterances become denser and denser in advanced productions. As for these differences, we can say that cross-linguistic influence appears only at advanced level, but only for some groups, some specific groups of learners, and according to structural similarities between source languages and target languages. That is, only our advanced English learners of Italian to resort to particles, probably because they perceive the existence of similar satellite constructions between L1 and L2. So this is not the case for English learners of French L2 or French learners of Italian L2. So our question is, why cross-linguistic influence is more evident in the advanced learners' data? Certainly because the learner has more linguistic devices to transfer lexicalization patterns of his L1 into the L2. However, this is just the case for learners whose L1 share the same formal constructions as L2, and if positive evidence is available in the input. And I think it is also important to stress that learners tend to look for similarities rather than for differences during second language acquisition. Probably that's why French learners of Italian L2 never perceive satellite constructions in the input, because the input confirms the existence of verb similarities between L1 and L2. So they do not make effort to search for other linguistic devices to code the same motion notions, that is via syntagmatic verbs. So if I have just some minutes, here I present some hints about the pedagogical implication of my results, because my question is, how can language teachers help learners, in particular French learners, grasp syntagmatic verb in Italian L2? So I think that certainly, first of all, teachers have to introduce verb framed constructions, but at the intermediate level, a teacher has to present satellite constructions in Italian classroom as an alternative way to talk about motion. Why to introduce a syntagmatic verb at the intermediate level? Because there are some syntagmatic levels which are not so transparent for learners and which demand more pragmatic mastery by learners. So it is also important to provide frequent clues of syntagmatic verb to facilitate their identification and comprehension, to adopt a form-functional approach and explicit grammar teaching of syntagmatic verb. Meta-language certainly through classroom interaction. And it's also important to pay great attention to the role of the L1, so to give, for instance, examples to raise the learner's awareness by comparing examples taken from the L1 and the L2. Another important item as other colleagues mentioned yesterday is to use video clips and visual images to show how spatial conceptualization may vary according to languages and to propose activities for applying syntagmatic verb in various situations. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Simona. Thank you. That's very good timing. Okay, so I open the floor to questions. Fribert, I think you put your hand up first.
He's clapping.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Oh, instead, I do see a hand up from Alberto. Yes.
Yes. Hi. Yeah, you can see me now.
Yes.
Yes, you can hear me as well. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Simona. That was a very, very interesting study and a very interesting talk. I also work in these languages, so definitely for me it was very, very relevant to study that. And I do the other direction, so it's Italians and French learning Spanish. So I have very similar results, very similar, a very similar picture. But there was something that I wanted to clarify with you because, yeah, I agree. In my data as well for the native speakers, my Italian speakers speaking Italian, they were as well closer in a way to the satellite frame pattern. So they use these syntagmatic expressions much more than the French and the Spanish, who were more prototypically verb framing that way. However, when comparing them, their performance in Italian, even if they use these syntagmatic constructions, they still had the verb frame pattern really, really salient, like really much more frequent than the satellite frame pattern, which was there, but it was not the main trend. So I was a bit surprised with the claim as a hybrid language. I think it might be a bit too much to consider Italian a hybrid language. I think it would be better to be like in decline, like maybe more high path salient than the others, rather than that. That's just my impression, or at least with my data, Italian was not that hybrid. I wanted to know if your data show the same, or maybe they were more balanced in your data.
But in my data, Italian, because I didn't have a lot of time to show.
Of course, yeah.
That Italian speakers, so what I found in my data is that you are right, that is verb framed pattern is dominant anyway.
Yeah, okay.
But there is a large use of syntagmatic words, which is not expected because I am Italian and I do not use a lot of syntagmatic verbs, so it was surprising for me. But I think you are right when you say that it is not the correct word hybrid. That is, it is better, I think, to talk about path salient languages within verb framed languages. Yes, you are right.
Yeah, I agree with that. And my data show the same pattern as well, a lot of use of these syntagmatic verbs. So definitely, I'm glad to see that we are coherent among our studies. So that's fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Renan, I think you're next.
Right, thank you. Great research, very similar to something that I've done in my master's research too, concerning cross-linguistic similarities between languages and so on, ringworm and psychotypology. So cool. And one of the main things, or one of the best things about these events these 2 days is that we can see how we are dealing with the different methodologies to try to explain the same sort of events, right? And then I have a question about that to you. You said that, if I understood it correctly, you tried to determine the proficiency level of the learners by morphosyntactic complexity of the narratives, right?
Yeah.
I'd like to know a little bit about how you went about doing that and what were the criteria you used.
Yes, I want first of all to say an important thing, that is at the beginning of my research, I used a written test to establish the proficiency level of learners. It was the Oxford Placement Test for Italian and the French test created by the University of Lille in France for French learners. But when I analyzed the oral narratives, I found a great gap between the oral productions and the results and the scores of the written test. So I decided to, since I wanted to study the oral productions, for me it was pertinent, it was better to focalize my attention on the proficiency level on the oral productions. That's why I choose to look at the morphosyntactic complexity. So if there was subordination or the temporal aspect, mood in verbs. Okay. And what on some complex constructions, for instance, in French, the structure clivée. I think that it was more pertinent for me to establish the proficiency level according to the oral narratives, because it was the aim of my research. There was a great gap between the scores of the written text and their productions, oral narratives.
That seems to make a lot of sense, because such placement tests, they are usually like multiple choice grammatical things that we have. Yeah, they don't really like, and then you're going to ask the learners to produce, and then how do you relate that, like the receptive knowledge and what they can produce, like input and output, right? Quite interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? There are no comments in the chat box at the moment. Would someone else like to ask a question? We still have a couple of minutes left. Maybe I can ask a very quick question. This is about the SV verbs that you do find in Italian. Is there anything about the main verb type that attracts this sort of construction or not? Are there any? I just wondered if there was any sort of semantic aspect of those types of verbs that can be identified.
My interest was just to, because there are a lot of different types of syntagmatic verbs in Italian. You can also find idiomatic syntagmatic verbs. So my interest was just to focus attention on syntagmatic verbs used for motion events.
Sure, but within the domain of motion, was there any?
Yes, my English native speakers, English learners of Italian L2, and Italian native speakers tend to use a lot neutral verb, such as go, followed by a particle, such as andare via, go away, for instance.
Yeah, right.
It was the most
common.
Yes.
Frequent. Okay.
Or correre via, or see, run away.
Oh, okay. So it was more away.
Yes, away was the particle
that was most frequent.
Yes.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay.